Nobody laughs when the truth finally steps into the ring. Danielle Brooks heard the words in her father's voice just as the silver tray slipped from her hands and struck the polished floor with a sharp metallic crash. Every head in the underground club turned toward her, but Danielle saw only one thing. Her younger brother Marcus lying near the ropes, dazed, struggling to sit up, while Victor Kane stood over him with a grin that belonged on a man who had forgotten the difference between victory and cruelty. The room glittered with expensive watches, tailored suits, crystal glasses, and the cold blue light above the ring. Wealth pressed against every wall, but not one person moved to help. They had paid to be entertained. Marcus was merely Pardo. 3 days earlier, Danielle Brooks had found Marcus sitting at their mother's kitchen table with a folded contract hidden beneath a stack of hospital statements. Rain tapped against the narrow window of the South Side apartment, and the old refrigerator hummed behind them with the tired persistence of something that had survived too many years. Marcus tried to cover the papers when she entered, but Danielle had spent most of her life noticing what other people hoped she would miss. She set down the grocery bag and held out her hand. "Give it to me." Marcus looked away. At 24, he still carried the same stubborn expression he had worn as a boy whenever he believed love gave him permission to lie. "It is nothing." "Then you will not mind showing me." The contract bore the Moretti Athletic Club seal, elegant black lettering stamped above language designed to look respectable. Danielle read every line slowly. Marcus had agreed to participate in a private exhibition against an opponent selected by management. The payment was $12,000, enough to cover several months of their mother's treatment and reduce the debt that had been following the family from mailbox to mailbox. What the document did not explain was why a neighborhood mechanic with limited training had been offered more money for one night than he could earn in half a year. Danielle placed the contract flat on the table. "You are not doing this." Marcus gave a humorless laugh. "You work 14 hours a day cleaning rooms for people who do not know your last name. Mom is choosing between medicine and groceries. I am doing something. You are walking into a place built to take advantage of people who need money. And your solution is what? Keep pretending we are one paycheck away from being fine." His words landed harder because they were true. Danielle looked toward the hallway where their mother slept behind a half-closed door. Evelyn Brooks had once filled every room with gospel music and the smell of cinnamon biscuits. Now even crossing the apartment left her breathless. Danielle lowered her voice. "Marcus, listen to me. The man they chose for you is Victor Kane." The color changed in his face, but he forced a shrug. "I know the name. You know only what people say now. I knew him before." Silence settled between them. Danielle had not spoken Victor's name in years. He had trained in her father's gym when they were teenagers, arriving early, staying late, smiling whenever Raymond Brooks praised him. But Victor never wanted to become better. He wanted everyone else to become smaller. When Raymond refused to participate in fixed matches, Victor disappeared into the underground clubs and took something from the Brooks family with him. Danielle reached across the table and covered Marcus's hand. "Promise me you will tear this up." He stared at the contract for a long moment, then nodded. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But that night, after Danielle left for the Moretti mansion, Marcus unfolded the paper again. At the bottom of the final page, his signature waited in fresh blue ink. And 72 hours later, beneath cold lights and the laughter of strangers, Danielle would learn exactly how much that promise had cost. Danielle had known Victor Kane before the expensive suits, before the private clubs, before men with polished shoes began calling him a champion. Back then, he was 17 and angry at the world, a broad-shouldered boy who arrived at Raymond Brooks's gym before sunrise and stayed until the city buses stopped running. The gym sat above a corner hardware store on East 79th Street, where winter wind slipped through the old windows, and every heavy bag carried a patch sewn by hand. Raymond never cared about a student's money, neighborhood, or last name. He cared about discipline. "Strength is borrowed," he often told them. "Character is what remains when nobody is afraid of you." Danielle learned those words before she learned how to wrap her hands. By 16, she could read balance from a shoulder, hesitation from a breath, and fear from the way a person planted one foot too far behind the other. Victor hated how easily she understood people. He was older, larger, and louder, yet Raymond corrected him while praising her patience. At first, Victor hid his resentment behind jokes. Then the jokes became challenges. He would push younger students too hard, ignore instructions, and celebrate whenever someone left the floor embarrassed. Danielle saw the change before her father did. Victor no longer wanted to master himself. He wanted permission to control everyone around him. The final break came when a promoter named Leonard Vale entered the gym wearing a camel-colored coat and a gold watch bright enough to catch every eye in the room. Vale offered Raymond money to arrange private exhibitions for wealthy clients. The matches would appear legitimate, but the outcomes would be decided in advance. Raymond refused before the man finished speaking. Victor did not. He began meeting Vale in secret, convinced that rules were only obstacles created by people too weak to win. Months later, Marcus followed Victor to one of those clubs, hoping to earn fast money for the family. He returned home silent and ashamed, carrying an injury that ended his chance at a college track scholarship. Raymond confronted Victor and threatened to expose the operation. 2 nights later, someone vandalized the gym and destroyed years of records, photographs, and equipment. No one was arrested. Raymond never accused Victor publicly, but Danielle remembered the way Victor avoided her eyes at the memorial service after her father died from a sudden heart condition the following spring. Grief did what no opponent had ever managed to do. It drove Danielle away from the floor. She packed her gloves into a cardboard box, buried them beneath winter clothes, and promised herself that the Brooks family would never again be pulled into a world where pride was sold as courage. Yet Victor carried that world forward. He built a reputation from staged victories, frightened newcomers, and rooms filled with people who confused cruelty with strength. Now, years later, he stood beneath the cold lights of Adrian Moretti's club, wearing the confidence of a man who believed the past had been erased. Danielle knew better. The past was not gone. It had simply been waiting for him to recognize her. Adrian Moretti first noticed Danielle Brooks on a Wednesday morning when a crystal decanter slipped from the hand of a nervous server in the west dining room. The bottle fell from nearly 4 feet above the marble floor, yet Danielle caught it before it shattered, moving with such quiet precision that the other staff members barely understood what had happened. She placed the decanter back on the tray, continued polishing the table, and never looked toward Adrian. He watched from the doorway longer than he intended. Most people became clumsy when they sensed his presence. Danielle became still, not frightened, balanced. Over the next 2 days, he began noticing other details. She never entered a room without scanning its corners. She carried heavy laundry baskets close to her center, never wasting movement. When a kitchen stool tipped beneath a young dishwasher, Danielle caught the boy by the arm and steadied the stool with her foot before anyone else reacted. Her hands were worn from work, but the skin across her knuckles held old, pale lines that did not come from cleaning. Adrian told himself that curiosity was not concern. Employees had histories. Histories became liabilities only when they entered his house uninvited. Still, he asked his security chief to review her background. The report gave him nothing unusual. Danielle Brooks, 28 years old, South Side address, no criminal record, several housekeeping positions, medical debt connected to her mother, and a younger brother employed at an auto shop. Ordinary on paper. Nothing about her felt ordinary in motion. That afternoon, Adrian found her standing outside the private training room, while Victor Kane worked with a young recruit named Caleb. Danielle held a stack of clean towels, but her attention was fixed on Caleb's stance. "He is going to hurt his shoulder," she said quietly. Adrian stopped behind her. "You have opinions about training now?" Danielle turned, her expression controlled. "I have opinions about preventable injuries." Inside the room, Caleb repeated the same movement and winced. Victor ignored it. Danielle stepped forward before Adrian could stop her. She set the towels down and spoke through the open doorway. "Move your right foot 2 inches outward. Keep your elbow closer to your ribs." Victor stared at her as if the furniture had offered advice. Caleb hesitated, then adjusted his position. The next movement came easier. The strain disappeared from his face. Victor's jaw tightened. "Get back to work," he told her. Danielle lifted the towels again. "That is what I was doing." She walked away without hurry. Adrian followed her into the hallway. "Where did you learn that?" Danielle paused beneath the warm light of a brass wall lamp. For a moment, something old and painful moved behind her eyes. From someone who believed strength should protect people. Adrian felt the answer settle somewhere he did not welcome. His own father had taught him a different rule. Power protected itself. Everyone else survived by staying useful. He watched Danielle disappear around the corner, her footsteps soft against the carpet. That evening, Adrian returned to the empty training room and stood where she had stood. He adjusted his right foot by 2 inches. The movement became cleaner. For the first time, he wondered how many people in his house he had mistaken for invisible simply because they had learned not to demand his attention. By the time the private exhibition began, the underground club beneath the Moretti mansion had filled with men and women who wore wealth like armor. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Crystal glasses caught the blue light above the floor. Bianca Russo moved among the guests in a white evening dress, smiling as though the suffering below had been arranged for her personal amusement. Danielle carried a silver tray through the room, but her attention remained fixed on the entrance. Marcus had not answered her calls all afternoon. She had checked the auto shop, their mother's apartment, and every place he usually went when he wanted to avoid a difficult conversation. Then one of the servers quietly mentioned the name listed for Victor Kane's final opponent, Marcus Brooks. Danielle felt the truth before she saw him. He entered from a side hallway wearing borrowed training clothes and an expression that tried too hard to look brave. His eyes found hers immediately. Shame passed between them. "You promised me," she said when she reached him near the edge of the floor. Marcus looked toward the guests instead of meeting her eyes. "They already paid the deposit toward Mom's treatment. Then we return it." "With what money?" His voice cracked beneath the music. "You are already working yourself into the ground." Danielle gripped the tray until its rim pressed into her palm. "This is not help. This is desperation wearing a price tag." Before Marcus could answer, Victor stepped into the light. The crowd welcomed him with raised glasses and confident applause. He had changed since Danielle last saw him, but not in the ways that mattered. The expensive robe, the carefully styled hair, and the polished smile only gave his arrogance a cleaner surface. His gaze moved across Marcus, then stopped on Danielle. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Raymond Brooks's daughter," he said softly. "Still cleaning up after other people, I see." Danielle held his stare. "And you are still choosing people who cannot challenge you." Victor smiled wider. "Your brother signed willingly." Adrian stood beside the center table, watching the exchange without interruption. Danielle turned toward him. "This contest is not equal." Adrian's expression remained unreadable. The agreement was reviewed and signed. A signature made under pressure does not make exploitation honorable. Bianca gave a small laugh. She has become very dramatic for someone carrying drinks. Several guests joined her. Danielle set the tray down. Marcus stepped closer and whispered that he could handle it, but fear tightened every word. The signal sounded. The room shifted into expectant silence. At first, Marcus tried to follow the basic instructions he had been given, but Victor controlled the pace with ease, keeping him off balance and making the difference in experience painfully clear. The guests began placing fresh bets. Bianca leaned toward Adrian and said something that made him smile. Danielle watched Marcus stumble and recover, his pride forcing him forward when common sense begged him to stop. Then Victor ignored the official's warning and continued pressing after the signal. Danielle moved before anyone could block her. She stepped onto the floor and placed herself between them. "Enough." Victor tilted his head. "Would you like to take his place?" Bianca laughed again. "Perhaps the maid believes she is a hero." Adrian looked at Danielle, amused by what he assumed was impossible courage. Then he made his careless offer. The room erupted around him. Danielle removed her apron, folded it once, and placed it beside the silver tray. Her eyes never left Adrian's face. "If I win, every debt agreement connected to this club is canceled, and these exhibitions end tonight." The laughter died unevenly. Adrian studied her, expecting fear to arrive. It did not. "Agreed," he said. Danielle turned toward Victor. For the first time, his confidence looked forced. The club attendants gave Danielle a plain pair of gloves and a dark training jacket from the supply room. No one offered encouragement. The guests watched with the restless curiosity of people waiting for an impossible mistake, while Bianca stood beside Adrian with a smile that never reached her eyes. Marcus sat near the edge of the floor with an ice pack against his shoulder, his face pale with guilt. "Danielle, you do not have to do this," he said. She tightened the final strap and looked at him. "That is what you told yourself when you signed the contract." Marcus lowered his eyes. Danielle softened her voice. "Stay seated. Let me finish what should never have started." Across the floor, Victor rolled his shoulders and studied her with open contempt. You walked away years ago, he said. People forget things. Danielle stepped into position beneath the cold lights. The body remembers what pride overlooks. The official reviewed the rules, but the words barely reached the guests. They were already discussing how quickly the contest would end. Adrian heard one man wager that Danielle would quit within 60 seconds. He said nothing. He had expected her confidence to weaken once the distance between courage and consequence became real. Instead, she stood with her weight centered, her breathing even, and her eyes fixed not on Victor's hands, but on his shoulders and feet. The signal sounded. Victor moved forward immediately, using his size to control the space and force Danielle toward the outer line. She gave ground without panic. To the audience, it looked like retreat. To Adrian, it looked like measurement. She watched the angle of Victor's right foot. She watched the small lift in his left shoulder before every committed movement. She watched how his breathing changed whenever the crowd reacted. Victor wanted applause more than precision. Danielle offered him neither resistance nor fear. She redirected, stepped aside, and made him begin again. The guests grew impatient. She is running, Bianca said. Adrian did not answer. Something about Danielle's stillness had begun to unsettle him. Victor pressed closer, and Danielle lost her footing for half a second. One knee touched the padded floor. Laughter broke across the room. Marcus rose from his chair, but an attendant held up a hand. Adrian leaned forward. Stop it, he told the official. Danielle looked directly at him and shook her head once. Not yet. She stood slowly while Victor smiled for the crowd. The room believed it had witnessed weakness. Danielle knew it had witnessed information. She had learned his reach, his rhythm, and the moment his confidence made him careless. Her father's voice returned from the old gym above the hardware store. A bully reveals himself when he thinks you are helpless. Victor advanced again, eager to turn the room's laughter into certainty. Danielle waited until the final possible second. Then she shifted 2 inches to her right, the same small correction she had once given Caleb in the training room. Victor moved past her line and had to turn. His smile faded. Danielle reset her stance before he could recover his composure. The crowd quieted. Adrian rose from his chair without realizing he had done it. Victor approached more carefully now. Danielle's eyes remained steady. She had not taken control of the floor yet, but she had taken something more important. She had taken away his certainty. Victor approached with less arrogance now, but the change did not make him wiser. It made him impatient. Danielle saw it in the way his shoulders tightened, and in the sharp breath he pulled through his nose whenever she slipped beyond his reach. The room had stopped laughing. Even Bianca's smile had hardened into a thin line. Adrian remained standing beside his table, one hand resting against the back of his chair, his attention fixed on Danielle as though every quiet movement were rewriting something he had believed for years. Victor tried to force the pace again. Danielle gave him space, then took it away. She guided him toward the edge, turned him back toward the center, and made him waste energy chasing an advantage that never arrived. Nothing about her movement was theatrical. She did not perform for the guests. She did not look toward Marcus for approval. She simply watched, adjusted, and waited. Victor's breathing grew louder. His feet became heavier. The confident rhythm he had carried into the contest began to break apart. Stop moving and face me, he muttered. Danielle's expression remained calm. You have been facing me this whole time. You just never learned how to see me. A murmur moved through the room. Victor's eyes narrowed. Then he recognized the pattern. The careful step to the right. The controlled turn. The refusal to be rushed. His face changed. Raymond taught you that. Danielle said nothing. Victor moved again, but uncertainty had entered him now, and uncertainty revealed what arrogance had hidden. He favored his left side whenever he became tired. He turned too quickly when frustrated. He watched the crowd instead of the person in front of him. Danielle used each weakness without cruelty, redirecting him until he stumbled and had to catch himself against the boundary rope. The guests drew a collective breath. Marcus slowly stood. Adrian's grip tightened on the chair. Victor looked at Danielle with something close to fear. Your father should have stayed out of matters that did not concern him, he said. The words were low, but the room had become quiet enough for Adrian to hear. Danielle's eyes sharpened. What matters? Victor realized too late that he had spoken beyond caution. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out uneven. Old business. The night the gym was destroyed? Danielle asked. Victor glanced toward Adrian. That single glance answered more than denial could have. Danielle stepped closer, her voice steady. You gave them the address. Victor's confidence cracked. He threatened people who understood how the world works. Marcus covered his mouth. Adrian's face lost all expression. Victor continued, desperate now to justify himself. Raymond thought principles could protect him. They could not. The room went still. Danielle had waited years for anger to feel like justice. But when the truth finally stood before her, anger felt smaller than she expected. Victor lifted his guard, inviting her to finish what grief had started. Danielle moved forward, stopped within inches, and lowered her hands. My father taught me to win without becoming you. Victor stared at her. The official looked toward Adrian, then ended the contest. No one protested. No one applauded. Victor sank to one knee, not from injury, but from the weight of being seen clearly at last. Adrian stepped onto the floor, his gaze moving from Victor to Danielle. For the first time that night, the most powerful man in the room did not look like a ruler. He looked like a witness. Adrian stepped onto the floor with the slow control of a man who had spent his life believing every room belonged to him. This one no longer did. Victor remained near the boundary, his confidence gone, while Danielle stood beneath the cold lights with her hands lowered and her breathing steady. Marcus watched from several feet away, one hand pressed against his shoulder, his eyes fixed on Victor as though years of unanswered questions had finally found a voice. You heard him, Danielle said to Adrian. Her tone carried no triumph. He admitted what he did. Victor pushed himself upright and looked toward Adrian with desperate expectation. I made money for you, he said. I protected this club. I did what you asked. Adrian's expression did not change. I never asked you to destroy a family. Victor gave a bitter laugh. You built a place where men like me thrive. Do not pretend you are different now because she embarrassed you. The accusation settled over the room. Bianca stepped forward, her white dress bright against the dark floor. Adrian, this has gone far enough. These people signed contracts. The guests paid for an evening, not a public confession. Danielle turned toward her. They paid to watch desperate people lose choices. Bianca's eyes hardened. You are an employee. Not anymore, Danielle said. Adrian looked at the folded apron beside the silver tray. Then he looked around the club at the men holding betting slips, the women clutching crystal glasses, and the attendants who had learned to remain silent because silence kept them employed. For years, he had called this place business. He had called the agreements voluntary. He had told himself that adults understood the risks when they signed their names. Now Marcus stood before him, 24 years old, buried beneath family debt, and willing to trade his safety for his mother's treatment. The truth was simple. A choice made under desperation was not freedom. Adrian turned to his security chief. Lock the office and secure every contract, payment record, and recording. Bianca stared at him. What are you doing? Closing the club. Her face went pale. My family invested millions of dollars here. Then your family will receive an audit instead of a return. You cannot make this decision without us. Adrian met her eyes. I just did. He removed the engagement ring from his pocket, the one Bianca had returned to him earlier that week for resizing, and placed it on the center table. The small sound it made against the polished wood carried through the silence. The wedding is canceled. Bianca froze. Around her, no one dared whisper. Adrian faced Victor again. You will remain here until the authorities arrive. The recordings will go with them, including your confession. Victor's voice dropped. You would hand over your own operation? Adrian looked at Danielle. She had defeated Victor without becoming cruel, while he had built power by refusing to question the cost. Tonight, I hand over the truth. He then turned toward the guests. Every debt agreement connected to this club is canceled. Every payment already withheld will be returned. Marcus looked at his sister, disbelief softening into relief. Danielle did not smile. Justice was not celebration. It was responsibility arriving late. Adrian stepped aside, leaving the center of the floor open for her. You won your terms, he said. Danielle held his gaze. No, they were never yours to withhold. Adrian lowered his head. For once, he did not defend himself. And in the silence that followed, everyone understood that the club had not closed because a powerful man had shown mercy. It had closed because a woman he had dismissed as invisible had forced him to see what his power had become. 6 months later, morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the former underground club, warming walls that had once reflected cold blue light. The betting tables were gone. The private bar had been replaced by rows of clean benches, shelves of training equipment, and a study corner where teenagers finished homework before practice. Above the entrance hung a simple brass sign, Raymond Brooks Community Center. Danielle stood beneath it with a clipboard in one hand, watching Marcus teach 3 younger students how to keep their balance. His shoulder had healed, but something deeper had changed in him. He no longer believed providing for his family required proving himself to strangers. Their mother, Evelyn, sat near the windows with a blanket over her knees, smiling as the room filled with the sound of sneakers, laughter, and patient instruction. Adrian had paid for the building's transformation, but Danielle had refused to let his name appear anywhere inside it. She had also rejected his first contract, his second proposal, and every attempt to give her authority without accountability. In the end, she accepted only after an independent board was created, every financial record was made public, and the center became legally protected from Moretti control. Adrian agreed to every condition. For the first time in his life, he signed papers that limited his own power. He visited on Thursday evenings, usually standing near the back wall, without security or announcement. The young people knew him only as Adrian, the man who repaired broken lockers and listened more than he spoke. He never stepped onto the training floor unless Danielle invited him. One evening, after the last student left and Marcus drove Evelyn home, Adrian found Danielle folding towels beside the old center table, the only piece of furniture she had kept from the club. Its polished surface no longer held betting slips. It held college applications, permission forms, and a jar filled with bus passes for students who could not afford transportation. Adrian placed a small velvet box on the table. Danielle looked at it, then at him. "You kept it." "I kept the reminder," he said. Inside rested the ring connected to the careless promise he had made before a laughing crowd. Danielle closed the box without touching it. "You do not marry a woman because she proved you wrong." Adrian nodded. Months earlier, that answer might have wounded his pride. Now it sounded like truth. "Then why would she marry you?" he asked. Danielle studied him in the warm silence. She saw a man who had closed a profitable operation, testified honestly about its records, and spent months repairing damage without asking to be praised. But change was not a single decision. It was a discipline, practiced when nobody was watching. "She might," Danielle said, "when you have learned to stand beside her, not above her." Adrian picked up the box and placed it back inside his coat. "Then I will keep learning." He did not ask how long it would take. He did not turn patience into another bargain. Together, they walked toward the exit, switching off the lights one row at a time. Above them, Raymond Brooks's name remained illuminated over the door. Danielle paused beneath it and looked back at the room her courage had reclaimed. The strongest person that night had not been the one who controlled the crowd, demanded obedience, or promised rewards. It had been the woman who could have answered humiliation with revenge, yet chose dignity instead. And that was how a place once built on desperation became a place where young people learned that real strength never requires someone else to feel small.